Welcome, Mr. Mike Hepp. If you guys don't know who Mike Hepp is, he created a racing recovery organization where he is helping people around the country, around the world, with all the problems that they've had over their life. And his story is remarkable. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How you doing?
We are good, my friend. How are you?
Awesome. Enjoying some beautiful weather for a change.
What are you talking about beautiful weather? Where are you from? Where are you living right now?
We're Bristol, PA. We're not far from you, and we're like 70 degrees down here today.
Oh, well, we're, what were we, 56, Speedy?
Somewhat. 56, no, I think it was warmer yesterday.
So, Mike, I was listening, and I actually was listening to a bunch of different people at my firehouse, and one person in particular, Joe, who speaks very, very highly of you. Really does. He's a good friend of yours. And he told me, he said, listen, my friend Mike, he's got an extraordinary story that he wants to tell to the people, to the world, about what he's been through and where he's been in his life. And I read different pieces of the bio that you sent me, and it's absolutely remarkable of the things that you have been through, the trials and tribulations you have been through in your life, and how you got through them, and how successful you have been since then. So why don't you tell a little bit about little bit about yourself, and tell the fans a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations at the age of 23 you've been through.
Well, it started out, to try and give you a short version of this. I just grew up in the 70s, and normal family, and a lot of drinking went on back then, and the long and short of it, I was kind of disconnected early on before I became, a full-blown alcoholic addict. And I had some learning disabilities early on in school. I'm the guy that rode the little yellow school bus, you know what I mean?
That's Speedy.
And, so I wound up going to a place out in Fort Washington for, behavioral problems and learning disabilities. So I never quite fit in with the guys in the neighborhood, and I always felt separated from. And early on in my teens, probably 14, 15, 16, began drinking, and I can honestly say that it did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And the shy kid that couldn't talk to people, that was kind of felt disconnected, that all went away when I drank. And so I chased that feeling for the rest of my life, and it's progressed into my early 20s. And I had a lot of warnings from the family. You might want to take a look at this, and it snowballed into something that I would have never thought in my wildest dreams. I wound up becoming homeless because of the disease, and showering behind dumpsters and stuff like that, and lost everything worthwhile in life living for. And I had a situation in 1989 with my father. I was already pretty much a full-blown addict and alcoholic at that point, and unfortunately my father had suffered from mental illness from the Second World War, and in June of '89 had committed suicide.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yes.
And I buried my mother 3.5 months later, and that just kind of, I kind of poured the coals on it, so to speak, from there. And it just took me to a place that I never would have dreamed in my wildest imaginations.
So outside of your family, because obviously I'm sorry for your losses, what ended up happening with your family, were there any people specifically that helped you get through those issues later on after your family passed away and through all this racing thing, the racing to recovery? Is there any specific people that you credit for helping you through that?
Back in '89, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there was some family support along the way, but I pretty much bottled it and tried to move on with my life. And I was handicapped and with the disease, and I tried every remedy not to do it. After I had my son was born in '91, and then I had two daughters after that, and I thought after they were born that I'd get it together. And and the woman I was with at the time, had taken the kids and left. So there wasn't a lot of, I wasn't looking for help. I thought that I could manhandle this thing, so to speak, and it just blew up in my face. But it took, 30 years before I finally got to a place where I'm living in Pennypack Park, fluffing up pine needles for a pillow at night and deciding, I probably need to address this issue here. The Racing for Recovery stuff, that didn't really start to happen until 2011. But, in 2004 or 5, I was homeless and living on the streets of Philadelphia.
We are speaking to Mike Hepp. He created a company and an organization called Racing for Recovery. Here's my question. What got you into racing? I mean, all the different trials and tribulations you've had in your past. I mean, from your family, from the drug abuse, from the drinking, all the things, being homeless. What made you get into racing the way you have in the past and now in the future?
Well, it's kind of unique. In the early 80s, I had an interest in professional drag racing, and like anything else that I enjoyed in life, it kind of went to the wayside through my addiction, and I completely really forgot about it. And ironically enough, my wife today, Martina, had got me a NASCAR experience ticket, and it triggered something in me. I went, holy smokes, I used to race back in the 80s, drag racing. And so I had gone back to Englishtown Raceway Park in Englishtown, New Jersey in 2011 to check the sport out again. And when I had gotten back there, there were some amazing giving cars that were out there that were doing some really positive stuff for people. And for instance, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Wounded Warrior Project, Infinite Hero, Alex's Lemonade Stand, breast cancer awareness. There's all that was going on, and I thought, wow, that's awesome. And then I kind of got hit with a lightning bolt. Nobody's doing anything about the disease of addiction in this country. And so I was born on that day. I didn't have no idea what it was going to springboard to from there, but I got to sort of back up. Well, actually, that was in 2011, so I went to Doug Foley's school, drag racing, and had gotten my super compilations. I think I was 45 at the time, and it was a great accomplishment. My kids were there, my wife was there, and had a blast. And by 2012, and this is just God working in your life, I grew up with a guy that's now president of Mike Hepp Racing for Recovery. His name's Glenn Moore. I'm just a guy that shoot out of the cannon. I'm the founder and driver of the car, but Glenn's the CEO of the company. And you wouldn't believe this, but I grew up with Glenn in my neighborhood back in the 70s and 80s, and everybody in the neighborhood separates, and you lose track of time and you lose track of people over the years. And real quick, we went to visit him at his place of business, and he turned at me after 25 years. He hadn't seen me. He said, "I can't believe you're still alive." And that was, he goes on from that point to tell me how he almost died from alcoholism, and that he had about 6 months to a year of sobriety at the time, and that he was really struggling. And I had told him of the answer that I had found, and that I would like to share it with him. So he had come to our home that I had opened up during the week for folks struggling, and the long and short of it, he recovered and got well. And so we talked about the possibility of a partnership with the Racing for Recovery program. I said, I want to go drag racing professionally. That's the goal, long-term goal, is to do it on a pro level. But we can start at the sportsman level. But if we're going to do it, we need to be able to help others in the process. We can't just go just to drag racing. We need to do something for others. And so I talked to him about the concept of the Racing for Recovery, and we partnered, and the rest is really history.
So, Mike, it mentions in your story that the only way you could be able to get help is a 12-step program to help your addiction. Now, how is the addiction, in terms of the recovery methods, how has it changed since when you first started, and how has Racing for Recovery, your Racing for Recovery, evolved the way that you've been able to help people?
Well, initially, Glenn and I talked about, we branded the car and we went out and we went public with it. We put our stories out on bios, and we went out and we wanted to tell people, listen, you're not alone out there. Unfortunately, everybody knows somebody that's jacked up on drugs or alcohol in one form or another. Maybe not directly, but somebody knows somebody. And like, again, our job was to go out there and use our story as an incentive for people to look and say, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it. And, if those guys can do it, we could do it. And so we just set out to be able to try and help some folks. And it kind of springboarded into, we wanted to help a couple people, and we wound up helping like 357 people into treatment through the program so far over the course of the last 7 years. And, we've been out there diligently working, to look for strategic partners to come on board and get behind the program, because I think there's a lot more that we can do with it. And it's just been an amazing ride.
We are speaking to Mike Hepp. He created an organization called Racing for Recovery, him and his friend Glenn. My question for you is, I've never been really heavily into drugs or drinking. That's not something that I have gotten into as a kid. I was a big jock. I stayed away from it. What really drove you to drink? What really drove you to do drugs? Were you hanging out with the wrong crowds? You were hanging out with the wrong people? What really forced you into doing those particular things?
I think, again, growing up in the 70s, it was just normal.
Party time, yep.
Say it again. I lost
No. I'm here. I'm saying the 70s were a big party time. So I know Studio 54, disco time, and I know that was when really cocaine was brought to the United States. It was really in the mid 70s. I watched the movie Blow, so I know a little bit about this, but I know that drugs became very popular in the 70s with all the bands, and I mean, you have the Grateful Dead, and you have all the different bands that drove you to want to do drugs. You know what I mean? So what I understand the hard times that you had and particular times that you had. But was there any particular reason why you started doing drugs, or it was just hanging out? It was the time you were hanging out with your buddies and you just said, you know what, there's nothing else better to do. Why not drink a little bit or smoke a little weed? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it. And like I said, I was one that was, dead set against drugs.
Right. So am I.
Or when I was young, it's okay to drink, but don't do drugs. And, your morals start to decay as the disease progresses, and, you get to a lot of your nevers. I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do that. And, but as far as the drinking concerned, it did for me, basically, like I said, there was something about alcohol for me that once I started, I couldn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
And like, the bar would be closing at 2:00 and I'd be getting 2 6-packs to go home.
Oh my God.
It was funny. It was a kind of deal where, I did construction work for a lot of years,
right.
And, guys would say to me, I'm going to get a 6-pack. There'd be 4 of us in a pickup truck going home, and he'd say to me, I want to get a 6-pack on the way home. And I'm going, that's great. What are you guys going to drink? And then the drug side of it, right? It went to, I smoked weed as a young kid, but it really didn't do anything for me. And, we did clubs and hanging out, and somebody'd chop a line out, and, I was good with that. And, unfortunately, somebody turned me on to crack cocaine.
Right.
And that was like the second coming of Christ. Once I hit that stuff, it was unbelievable. Absolutely. That stuff will make a priest kick a stained glass window right out of a church. It's some nasty stuff.
I'm sure.
And, once I started, I could not stop, and I couldn't tell you enough. I probably 5 or 6 years steady on that. The end of my addiction, I was drinking 2 30-packs of beer a day and $250 worth of rock cocaine every day.
That's a lot.
Jeez.
That's a lot.
So, Mike.
And I thought I really did I thought I was buff and ripped like the jocks, you know what I mean? I'm like 115 pounds soaking wet.